Story 1. He didn't have any concept of saving money. It was always just there because his money was always earning money. Having money was an income stream in itself. Also, he had no concept of how much anything cost. Story 2. I grew up very blue-collar poor. The men I knew fixed cars, re-roofed their own houses, knew plumbing and electrical stuff, etc. My husband grew up very wealthy. His family had a massive house, a pool, a vacation home in Spain, and maids. Honestly, the contrast was stark. The first thing he did after we moved in together was put liquid dish soap in the dishwasher. He didn't know anything. He didn't know the vacuum needed to be emptied. Could have been a deal breaker, but he fully embraced his ignorance and learned. It was a whole new world, and he loved it. One of my favorite memories is of putting up our first Christmas tree. He had never been part of that and got so much joy from it. Story 3. She was a full-time professional fine artist, specifically an oil painter. Dad was a pioneer in green energy. The whole family is wealthy as a result. She was able to focus on school, earn her Master of Fine Arts, travel the world on residencies, and more. She was wonderful, and it goes to show you that when you have a well-adjusted upbringing, support, and the money to provide resources, you can be who you were born to be. She absolutely could not relate to the socioeconomic struggles of the people she dated, though. Story 4. Never knew. She worked a normal job and lived in a normal apartment. It wasn't until someone told me after we broke up, she moved for work, that I found out her family was wealthy. Story 5. I didn't, but my sister did. He grew up in extreme poverty, sold his fledgling software business in the late 1990s for a ton of money, and then met my sister. He's one of the nicest, most generous, most humble people I know. He gives a ton to charity, lives in a small house in the middle of nowhere, and funds many small businesses, from things like food trucks to people who want to start a clothing store. His motto is always the same. Any return on investment goes to funding a different project. There are probably a dozen small businesses in a small town that he gave seed money for and went hands off the instant they could be self-sufficient. I think the fact he grew up so poor gives him a much better understanding of people who are struggling. People need to have the chance to have a chance, is what he said to my father when he was questioning him about money investments. What a dude. I'd marry him myself if I were gay and if he didn't love Adam Sandler movies. Story 6. Dated the daughter of a wealthy member of parliament for my country's Conservative Party. During dinner discussions at their home, it really hammered it home how little her mother, the member of parliament, understood about the daily reality of being poor. Story 7. Had a girlfriend in high school. We dated until sophomore year of college. What baffled me wasn't her disregard for the cost of things, but the fact that she couldn't understand why I couldn't just pick up and take her out for nice dinners or buy her $400 Louis Vuitton sneakers she wanted for Christmas, especially since she was willing to buy me $250 Jordans. I declined. She was such a sweet girl but had no concept of other people coming from poor families. No idea how I had no money despite being 16 or 17 and not having a job. When I got my first minimum wage job at 18, I spent pretty much everything I had on her for several years. She also took me out and bought me nice gifts, but she never had a job. She had a $300 per week allowance from her dad, but would ask him for money whenever she wanted anything, so she wouldn't spend her own allowance on anything. She had like $9,000 in her bank account by the time we were 18, and I had $200 to my name most of the time. Very nice girl. Gorgeous. She was very good to me, but I eventually lost interest because of reasons that had nothing to do with money. Story 8. My ex was a poor sod, but his family I got to know was wealthy. I also got to know he was basically leeching off them, which led to the strange arrangement of him not earning nearly as much money as he expected from anyone else like me. He would constantly criticize the way I lived an ordinary life. My furniture was terrible, my clothes were cheap, and my gifts were never good enough. How did I not buy my food at the gourmet store anyway? According to him, I didn't know how to cook either, because how could you make authentic Italian pasta without the real Italian recipe? Recipes that his parents brought from all of their luxury travels all over the world, none of which came from him. His cooking critiques were made even more hilarious by the fact that this dude couldn't cook even a simple dish on his own, but his brother was a chef, so whenever he needed instructions, which was always, he would call his brother. I left him soon because his attitude was utterly insufferable. What I learned is that it's okay if you're rich. You're still dateable as long as you're not an obnoxious person. Story 9. The family was an entity in itself and had rules. Relationships are everything. The family itself is a thing, the club, the parties, the vacations, the homes, the cars, the business, it's all about the family. The patriarch, the traditions, the schools, the business partners, and the neighborhood and the club. It's not a bad thing, it's just different. I was raised to be independent and get out of my parents' house. They stick together like glue. Everyone has a role to play, but they have security and they belong. I never belonged anywhere. I was raised by people who had kids because that's what you were supposed to do, and then I got out of their house when I turned 18 and that was that. Story 10. I have done it twice, once in undergraduate school and once in veterinary school. The girl in undergraduate school kind of felt like she was dating me for the experience. She had never been to an Aldi before and went overboard on the Aldi fines, and was very confused that I went to both Aldi and Meijer for my groceries. Her dad absolutely hated me because I wanted to be a veterinarian instead of a real doctor like him. She always asked weird questions about growing up not rich, and I'm pretty sure she thought my childhood was like the movie 8 Mile. I grew up in a suburb of Detroit, but very much not 8 Mile. Otherwise, she was pretty chill about most things. She usually paid for stuff if we went on expensive dates, but she also seemed to genuinely enjoy the cheap dates I managed to find. I found a lot of nice trips with my student discounts. The girl in veterinary school was determined to Pretty Woman me. Or I guess more like the episode of The Simpsons, where Lisa tries to make Willie a gentleman. She insisted I come to Whole Foods with her. She had a polo pony and wanted me to learn about polo and ride horses and stuff. By the way, horses really don't like me. She had done a lot of study abroad and seemed almost offended that I had gotten into the program without it. She would buy fine wines and cheeses and then want to see how I reacted to them and seemed surprised when I knew about things from the museum. It was nice at first to get a bit spoiled, but it got weird. She also had no concept of what was expensive for the rest of us. So she always wanted to do really fancy nights out at high-end clubs after exams, and the rest of us would be like, it's $2 beer night at the campus bar, so we're going there. Story 11. In the majority of cases, all is fine until you meet the family and friends. You sit there like an idiot, unable to relate to anything they say, and once you think a familiar topic appears, it ends up in a discussion about $10,000 baby strollers, wines, or childhood memories about skiing in Switzerland or taking a trip to the seaside with their first Porsche. Their friends' interests were mostly things outside my tax bracket. I couldn't even relate to typical girly discussions about makeup and clothing because their talks were about picking Birkin over Chanel, not about a cute Zara top. Problems also start when it comes to buying a gift because there is no way you can match the amount of what they want to buy you and any kind of decision involving finances when you want to go 50-50, but the holiday your partner picked equals 5 of your salaries. A lot of people make it work. I tried 2 times, and each time I felt out of place very quickly. Story 12. I wouldn't say I was poor, more average. But the 2 wealthy women I dated were both quite spoiled. They expected to get their way, and what was interesting for me was that they both expected their money to open doors and solve problems, rather than using courtesy or charm. My ex-best friend was the same. What was very noticeable for her, especially, was the smallest thing was a crisis. People who have never dealt with true pain or loss because they've always been shielded from it are upset by small things. Story 13. I grew up in an upper-middle-class family with 2 leftist, help people out, lawyers for parents. So we were not poor by any means. However, I was engaged to a woman whose father was a partner at one of the United States' top 5 law firms. His retirement income is more than my parents' combined working incomes. I learned that they used money to attempt to solve all of their problems in life, especially interpersonal ones. I learned that even at that level of wealth, Americans still teach their kids we're poor. I learned that the social pressures that all of those people live with are incredibly intense, and as a result, they and their social circles are infinitely more competitive and judgmental of each other than anyone I grew up around. She was very spoiled, having grown up watching her mom scream at her dad anytime she was upset, and then seeing her dad spend money on her mom to placate her. She expected that in our relationship, and as a broke graduate student, I obviously could not provide that, nor would I have wanted to even if I could have. Story 14. I grew up middle class and sometimes really struggled depending on my dad's job status. My wife grew up quite wealthy, with maids, a nanny, vacations all over the world, and private school. Our biggest hurdle during the first couple of years of dating was lifestyle issues. Just seeing how much she'd spend without even worrying about the price or budgeting, not thinking twice about a purchase or when grocery shopping. It was the small things I was more amazed at and found tacky more than anything. If you asked her, she would say I have far more financial literacy than her. She's a hard worker and works long hours but still has that safety net. We are happily married, but navigating status and class was a huge hurdle in the early stages of our relationship and sometimes still creeps in. Even now, during the holidays, it's noticeably different between how my family does things versus hers. My siblings have great jobs, homes, etc., but it still does not compare to how elaborate and expensive my wife's family does things. Story 15. I guess mine is a success story. My mom was a single mom and cleaned hotels for a living. We were well below the poverty line. I got free lunch at school, started working at 14, and was the first person in my family to attend college, that whole deal. I met my now husband right before COVID-19 hit. I was doing great financially by my standards, low middle-class salary, still renting a house with a mother-in-law type guest apartment that I shared with a friend, and slowly paying off my student debt. I could go out to eat twice a month and afford to have a dog, so I pretty much felt like I made it. He is a very specialized type of doctor. We met on a dating app. He doesn't come from money, so I think that helped us to connect initially. Plus, he's worked very hard and he actually works for his money, rather than just having it. We live pretty modestly compared to his friends in the same general field, but we travel a lot. I still work, but much less. The biggest thing to me is that I didn't realize the constant anxiety and stress that being poor, or even being kind of okay but still struggling, creates. The always doing math, always checking my bank, stacking bills just right to avoid overdraft, waiting for payday. I don't think about those things anymore, and that's pretty surreal. Also, the thing that upsets me the most consistently is how much extra stuff and free things you're given when you don't need it. We get our hotel rooms or plane seats upgraded, and extra food or drinks at dinners. Stuff that would have made my year if it happened to me when I really needed it. It honestly makes me upset and angry at times, and my husband doesn't see why. Editing to add one more thing on my mind a lot lately. Kids. I'm pregnant, which is great, but I'm so worried about our kids being out of touch or spoiled. I know there are a lot of variables to that, but the idea of doing private schools or brand new first cars, it gives me the ick. Story 16. I've dated a couple. I grew up adjacent to wealth, and first off, they were lovely people, caring and thoughtful. But the truth is, they were simply unable to understand poor. What I realized was that the struggle to afford things binds people together. Working towards a common goal, like a trip or a more expensive item, is a reward that couples can share together. We did it, they'll say. I also realized just how much the subject of money comes up in any relationship, and if you aren't in the same boat financially, it's alienating for both of you. It's hard to get past that in most situations. Story 17. Partner born to a wealthy family with generational subdued wealth. They took international trips a few times a year, had a live-in housekeeper, attended the best schools, participated in the National Outdoor Leadership School, and had exposure to sports and arts. A good person, they gave back through volunteering and donations. In contrast, they could not relate to debt, fears of homelessness, or money anxiety. The biggest contrast: never afraid to try new things or make mistakes. Took a job that didn't work out? That's okay. The family will keep you afloat until you find something else. Broke a leg overseas because you took a skiing risk in Italy? No worries. We'll charter something or find a way to get you out. I don't have that kind of freedom. Story 18. I learned that soup could be homemade and didn't just come in cans. In fact, I discovered a whole bunch of foods I had never previously encountered, such as dates. In general, I realized that outwardly perfect families with plenty of money and material security could still be miserable and dysfunctional. A comfort, maybe, and an eye-opener. Edit. Some context for all the folks trying to educate me on soup. When I learned the fact above, I was 15. I was raised by a single working mom who didn't cook much. and to that point hadn't made soup. She wasn't lazy or ignorant. Further edit. The two most recent soups I made.